Canada has avoided U.S. President Donald Trump's tariffs for now, with a 30-day reprieve on the imposition of 25% duties. The relief comes after Canada agreed to a number of commitments aimed at strengthening border security.
I think we won the narrative, guys, over the weekend. It was all over the news, including on Fox News, yeah. And we needed to stand strong. We needed to come out with $155 billion. We needed to make sure that we were pushing back because President Trump also respects strength.
So Canada says it won the narrative, but it's one thing to win the story, it's another to win a trade war. And our next guest says it won't be an easy path for Canada. Stephen Poloz is a former governor of the Bank of Canada and now a special advisor to Osler Law Firm. Stephen Poloz, good to see you. Thanks for coming in.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks.
You were spelling out a scenario in a speech recently where you said the trade war, if it happens to its full extent with the U.S., we could see the Canadian dollar drop so much the Americans essentially don't suffer the consequences of tariffs. How does that scenario work in your view?
Yeah, that's a conceivable scenario.
Right.
It's not necessarily one we would predict. Usually things get muddy and it's somewhere in between of all those things. But for sure the exchange rate, that's why we have a flexible exchange rate, to help us adapt to major shocks. This would be one. And you would expect the dollar to go down probably quite significantly. And to the extent that it does so, what it does is it offsets that tariff effect on the price that the American consumer pays.
Because their buying power stays strong relative to ours.
It goes up, right? Yeah. So the actual mechanics, thing in the limit, if the tariff adds 25% onto the price of a Canadian good that they're buying, the exchange rate could go up 25%, and then it makes it the same for them. Which, by the way, also means then the Canadian exporter, continues business as before. So that's, of course, in the limit. I wouldn't expect that big of a move, but we need to be thinking about those kinds of scenarios. The trick is, that sounds like a free lunch, all the effects we're talking about disappear, but they don't. That exchange rate depreciation would reduce the income of all Canadians because our purchasing power would go down and boost the purchasing power of all Americans.
So the gap on, household income and all of these things just widens even further.
Well, that's correct.
Yeah.
And, may be part of the thinking that the president has in mind when he claims that it's the exporting company that pays for the tariffs.
Where do you see the dollar going in this sort of scenario? It's below 70 cents now, just below 69.8 or something. What kind of range would we be talking about there?
So realistically, we need to be thinking of sort of a double-digit percentage decline. So sort of the 60-ish cent range or low 60s would offset a lot of the tariff effect, both to Americans and to Canadian exporters. But as I said, spread the pain then to all Canadians. And in that scenario, of course, that would boost Canadian prices. That's the main mechanism that would be in play. And given that the economy would already be pretty soft, it probably wouldn't become an actual inflation problem. It'd be a little bit like back in 2016, like 2015, when the oil prices collapsed in early 2015, Canadian dollar declined by 20%.
It went from 94 cents down to low 70s.
That's right. So 20%. And the interest rate had fallen to kind of cushion the blow to the economy. And as a result, the Canadian dollar effect, the inflation rate went up by about 1 percentage point for about a year or a little longer than a year, and then faded back to baseline.
All of these variables and all of this volatility speaks to the challenge that Tiff Macklem, your successor at the bank, has laid out, that it is so difficult to model the full impact of these tariffs because we've never seen anything like it before. But the estimates is that it's pretty much economic carnage, even if it is offset in some way, like a 5% GDP drop, 2 to 3% contraction, 10% unemployment. How do you see it?
Well, I see it exactly like that. I'm sure we can't do any better than that kind of analysis from my old colleagues. Important thing that we got to keep mentioning is that 5% or so decline in Canadian incomes, that's forever. Okay, that doesn't just fade away on us a couple of years later.
Even if the tariffs go away?
Oh, if the tariffs go away, then we get to reverse it all.
Sure, gotcha.
Unless there's scarring. There can be permanent damage. Investment decisions that were made under during the first Trump term never get reversed. Canadian companies reduce their investment in Canada and increase their investments in the United States to build natural hedges against today. And that, of course, never gets reversed, So those losses are forever. So I think the most important thing, as the governor has said, what I've described is a couple of extreme scenarios. The real world's going to be somewhere in between, plus there will be fiscal actions by our governments to kind of complicate that picture. And so you have to take all that into account to decide what's appropriate.
Well, there's also the possibility that he goes after Europe and he goes after other countries, and then it becomes a global phenomenon, not just a continental one, and that creates even more uncertainty and cost. But you talked about fiscal actions from the government.
Yes.
Going into COVID, the balance sheet was a lot better at the national level because they took on all of this debt to protect the provinces, essentially. And the economy had a better spine of strength, it seems, than sort of the productivity weaknesses that are there now.
That's right.
We were much better equipped as a country to handle COVID, as tough as that was, than it seems we are to handle tariffs right now.
I would say we were at a better starting point. Just before COVID, inflation was on target. And unemployment was at a 40-year low. It's kind of like a healthy person gets COVID, they shake it off, right? And the economy shook it off quite well, before Christmas that year, everything was back on track. And so I think this time we start from a weaker position. And so some of the estimates we're dealing with may actually be underestimates because of that.
It could be worse.
It could be a little worse. But I think that's, those are decimal points. And the point is, though, this is going to really be a negative. And if we have other options for finding a way to not have that, then of course that's the better way to go.
So the push now, lower internal trade barriers, get projects going faster, right? There is an urgency on lingering issues that have never had sort of the urgency to get dealt with before.
Yes.
But there's still all of this uncertainty because at some point the threat of a tariff functions like a tariff.
Correct.
And people don't make the investment in Canada or they don't make it at all because of the uncertainty. So what can you reasonably do in the time you have as a series of national and subnational governments to tariff-proof as much as you can and mitigate against what could potentially come?
Well, I think the biggest thing you can do, the internal trade barriers is an obvious. We've been saying it for years.
It's been there forever, and they don't do it.
Well, but if that's the benefit of a crisis, well, let's see what we can do with that. We could offset the entire effect potentially. We could maybe get the president to back away if we just came to the table with the big bump in military spending that he's always been looking for. There are things that we could consider doing, and that would be great if that happened. But the fact is, we can't pretend this isn't happening. And as you say, just the threat will cause investment to be lower, and maybe have those decisions like last time head to the United States. Canadians have over $1 trillion worth of assets on the ground in the United States today. That's a big investment. That's more than the Americans have invested in Canada by far. And so that kind of is a natural hedge. And of course, companies have learned, here it is again. So maybe we should do even more of that. So that means the economy will slow regardless of whether the tariffs go on or not. And I think the best solution then is to focus on investment. If those are headwinds to investment in Canada, we need to overcome those headwinds and bring policies that truly incentivize modernization, digitalization of our companies, the embracing AI, et cetera, so that we are more resilient the next time around.
Is this tax credits, overall tax breaks? What are you talking about there, incentivizing? Because the uncertainty, they're going to need a sweetener, it seems.
Yeah, no, I think it's incentivizing. One of the reasons the U.S. economy is so strong right now, it's an investment boom. Yeah. And it's from the IRA, tax credits from Biden. We need something that's bigger, in effect, in order to offset that uncertainty premium that's there. And I think of it as, that kind of like giving people a fishing rod because it performs forever, as opposed to giving them a fish today and then another one tomorrow. I think if we focus on that with our resources, limited as they are, that'll pay off better in the longer term and make us more resilient.
Just as a final point on that, though, the U.S. has done the IRA to great effect, right? In terms of getting investment. but they are running a deficit.
Yes.
Like 6, 7, 8% of GDP
Yes.
is where it gets to. Like that's Canada running COVID deficits all the time,
Yes.
essentially.
Yeah.
So like, how do you compete against that? The reserve currency of the biggest economy, willing to add $1 trillion to their debt every 100 days. Like it's impossible to keep up.
Yes. So that's clearly unsustainable.
Yeah.
The only thing that we could say that's positive about that is that that deficit is driving investment in the U.S. economy. Therefore, in effect, it's productive long into the future. Whereas if you have a deficit that's driving consumption, it does not have that secondary effect. So let's at least look at that. I think they're going to have to deal with that in some way, and they think tariff revenues will help. There'll have to be tax changes. I guess all that. We're in better shape. So we do have the ability, I think, to step up and focus on that. If companies are investing well and modernizing, that'll be job creation, and that's better than giving away money, in the sort of consumption stream.
Stephen Poloz, former Bank of Canada governor. Always appreciate the time and the insight. Thank you, sir.
It's my pleasure. Thanks.
The Prime Minister thinks President Trump is serious when he says he wants Canada to join the United States. Justin Trudeau said that privately to a group of business leaders, policy experts, and politicians in Toronto today. It was part of an economic summit, a brainstorm on how to make the economy less reliant on the United States as its president threatens a trade war. Well, Goldy Hyder was in attendance there. He's the president and CEO of the Business Council of Canada, and he joins us now. Goldy, good to speak with you. A lot going on, as you just heard. I wonder if what insight or reaction you can share with us on what the Prime Minister said in that meeting and what we have reported about what happened in the phone conversations with President Trump, that they were given the heads up that the president may start threatening treaties, and President Trump started dangling a conversation about the 1908 treaty on the Canada-U.S. border. And this seems to inform some of their thinking that he's pretty serious about his intentions. How do you view that?
Well, look, David, thanks for having me. And obviously, I was in a meeting that was in a closed-door meeting, so I won't speak about what specifically took place there. Suffice to say that I'm a little surprised at all the attention the comments are receiving, simply because it's not a secret. The president not talked about this once or twice. When you say something 10, 15 times, just maybe you are serious. And so we believe that the country is taking it seriously already. And that's part of what I saw in this room today, is people who normally might be, battling on a number of things, business, labor, and different groups, have come together. The president's comments have effectively galvanized our country and have unified us, because what it's served to do is to say, what's going on here? And how can we let that happen? As Minister McKinnon said earlier in this, we're proud Canadians. We're going to defend ourselves. We're going to unite, and we're going to move forward. How do you do that? And what happened in this room today is an opportunity. Governments are going to come and go, with all due respect, but the people in that room who really represent Canadians found a way to get past their differences, to say we've got to work together and see this as an opportunity, see this as a wake-up call to strengthen our own country. The president is not responsible for the interprovincial trade barriers. He's not responsible that we've landlocked ourselves to a single customer on so many of our products. He's not responsible for how long it takes to get permitting done to get these critical minerals that we all talk about, like they're available at the corner store. These are things that Canada has done to itself, and I think we're in a place now where, if we're serious about bringing down those interprovincial trade barriers, yes, I know the field is littered with people who have said they're going to do that. We met with Minister Anand yesterday, and she is working very hard with the premiers, whom I'm told are unified. And all it takes, David, is simply to say we mutually recognize each other's regulations and laws. If we can't do that inside Canada, then we have no right to be lecturing other countries about protectionism.
No, and look, I take your points there, but I do want to circle back. Like, you're surprised that these comments are getting so much attention. I appreciate President Trump has said these things before, or versions of these things before. But the fact that a senior U.S. official felt the need to give the Canadian government a heads up, and then President Trump is getting into the granular, details of a 1908 treaty between the United Kingdom and the United States. Does that alarm you in any way that he's going through the fine print of how the continent is structured?
David, if we spent our time thinking about what's going on in Washington or how to appeal to an audience of one, we're losing this moment. It is far more important for us to be talking to Canadians, to talk about the fact that when you are wanted this badly, it must be because you have something that the United States wants, in which case I would tell you, so does a lot of other countries in the world. Look what we did when we sent the Germans back, the Japanese, the Koreans, the Greeks on our LNG. Just today, it's being reported that America and Japan are working on a way to get LNG to Japan via Alaska, where Japan would pay for the pipeline. We have what the world wants. Enough of where we've been. We need to focus on where we are. It was music to my ears to hear a government that was anti-nuclear, that was anti-pipeline, that was anti-LNG, now suddenly talk about all of these things as being critical to our future. I couldn't agree with them more. So let's seize this moment. Let's not be distracted. Let's take it as an opportunity to build Canada, to strengthen Canada, to come together, to work in the best interests of Canadians, and to build our prosperity. Because, David, if we don't do it now, we're going to go back to regularly scheduled programming, and that's not in our national interest. If we don't realize that today, I don't know what it would take.
Look, as someone who's been on the air too much lately, I wouldn't mind a bit of regularly scheduled programming, but I take your point on the economy. But look, I get the importance of having the conversations you're having in that room today and all the different interests, and maybe there is the urgency to knock down some of these trade barriers and clean up regulatory things to speed things along. But you know, someone who wasn't in that room today was Doug Ford, who called an election to totally on the intention of dealing with the United States. And he said he didn't need to be in a room with a bunch of people he's talked to 1,000 times when he knows what needs to be done. I mean, what do you say when the leader of Canada's biggest province, even though he's in the middle of an election campaign, says something about that, like that about your efforts today?
Well, look, he's in the middle of an election campaign, so I won't be commenting on that. What I will say is I'm looking forward to go to Washington with 13 premiers next week, a group of CEOs that have businesses in America, that have interests in terms of deepening our relationships. Because, David, you know what we can't get away from? Are the facts. And just like Canada has to deal with the facts that it has when it comes to getting our natural resources to market, we also have to share with Americans that their economic security is deeply intertwined with Canada's. Why do you think he has the interest in Canada? It's our critical minerals, it's our oil, it's our gas, it's our potash, it's our nuclear, it's our AI capabilities, it's our aerospace. There's all kinds of industries that are in Canada where we are global champions. And one of the things I want to see coming out of this, one of the reasons I said yes on a late Friday evening to be with you, David, is to talk to Canadians directly about how we need to look at ourselves and realize that this is a moment for us to get away from some of the historical the things about being Canadian, ripping down the successful and, you know, kind of spending money we don't have, and all those things that have made us the way we are. That is not going to get us to where we need to go. We need to be ambitious. We need to have a growth strategy, because clearly we have what everybody wants, David. So let's not be weak. Let's come at it from a position of strength, but be mature in our response, be strategic and deliberate in our response, how we're going to get Canada right, how we're going to get North America right, and how we're going to leverage our relationships and our trade agreements that we have around the world. We have these things before us. We just need to use them.
A lot of the reorientation of markets for some of the big things, that's going to take time, right? Like, you know, well beyond the 30-day pause, for example, on the tariffs. So it's an effort that's going to need to be medium to long term for a lot of it. But Goldy, as a final point, Anita Anand, going back to the internal trade thing, the interprovincial barriers, she says a lot of this can be knocked down and flattened within 30 days. I mean, do you buy that? Because I've been at a lot of premiers conferences where they've talked about this and it doesn't really happen except on the margins. Do you think there's enough urgency that you could see real meaningful progress, say, by March 1?
Well, it's said that a crisis focuses the mind, and it's clearly focused the mind. I mean, we have Premiers Eby and Legault and others talking about the importance of, you know, oil and gas flowing east to west and west to east. It's amazing to hear that. We have a Prime Minister who's declared how huge fan he is of nuclear. You know, I mean, these are all facts that have simply just caught up to our time. So can we bring those barriers down? Yes, we can. In fact, we met with Minister Anand yesterday and a group of chief executives to talk about, you know, labor mobility, to talk about, you know, how it is that these barriers are a tariff on Canadians imposed by Canadians on Canadians. It's a tax. And if we don't bring them down now, when your economy is, yes, it's okay. We had 76,000 jobs created this month, largely because how well the Americans are doing. We want to make sure that we control our own destiny. It's supposedly, I believe it's been said that there's about 4% of GDP growth trapped in those interprovincial barriers. That is a phenomenal number. If we get half of that, people will see that to their benefit. Costs will come down, more jobs will be created, and we'll have economic growth in our country. And that's how you maintain your sovereignty. You don't become dependent on others. You become independent by growing your economy and playing to your strengths. And part of our strengths is our human resources. We have really smart people here, David, and I think we're going to figure our way through this.
Goldy Hyder, always appreciate the time, sir. Thank you for being here late on a Friday.
Good to be with you.